Hello, welcome to Makeup and Monarchies. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany. I am a cosmetologist, makeup artist, hairstylist, and lover of all things UK history. And we're getting to the end of what I'm going to call part one of War of the Roses. So we're going to talk about Edward the Fourth today, and this is going to be done in two parts. There's way too much that goes on that I can't fit into one video, so we're going to do two. So we're going to cover from his birth up until 1471-ish early. So if I'm also going to be putting on this makeup today, so if you would like to know what I used for products today, it will be listed down below. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Also, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok under the same name at Makeup and Monarchies. And if you enjoy what I do here and like to help support me, you can head on over to buymeacoffee.com/makeup and monarchies and donate some coffee to me. So I think that's it for this. I also do want to do a disclaimer. I swear a lot. Sorry. If that's something that bugs you, I apologize ahead of time, but this may not be for you. I mean, I want you to watch it, but if you can get past my naughty mouth, then more power to you. So with that being said, let's get into it. Hello. So today is actually going to be part one of two because there's just so much going on at this time with Edward that I can't do one video. So, yeah. So Edward was born on April 28th of 1442 in Rouen, France, Normandy. He was the oldest surviving son of Richard of York and Cecily Neville, Duchess of York. He was born in Rouen because his dad was stationed there basically on a military campaign as part of his position as Lieutenant of France. Two of his other younger siblings, Edmund and Elizabeth, were also born in Rouen. Edward had a strong claim to the throne. I am going to go ahead and say that I believe, based on lineage, descendants, that he had a stronger claim than Henry VI. Sorry. So he was descendant from Edward III through both his mother and his father. Maternally, he was Edward's great-great-grandson, and paternally, his great times 3 or 4 grandson. So he definitely had more. And I know people argue about this, which I get it, whatever. But his claim to the throne was far stronger than Henry VII. I said it. Because if we're going to say, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Anyways, let's get back to it. There were rumors that Edward was the bastard child of his mother and a low-born archer. This stems from a few different things. His baptism, christening, was very small and private event. Also, he was tall and he had lighter hair. Now, personally, being a hairstylist, cosmetologist, this means nothing to me that he had light hair. His dad was on the shorter side and had dark hair. So again, this doesn't mean anything. Jeans are jeans. Cecily was a taller girl, and he looked like two of his other siblings, George and Margaret. So another reasoning behind this rumor was his birthday, and that his father wasn't really around at the time, I'm going to quote, at the time of conception. And also, in my opinion, these reasons are shit. At the time of his baptism, his dad's rank wasn't high. So I think that probably was a lot to do with why it wasn't as big of a deal. And another reason I think it's shit, he probably took more on as like the Neville side of his family, whereas the Plantagenet York side, dad's side, like I said, he was darker. Richard, Edward's youngest brother, that would go on to be Richard III, looked like their dad. So he was shorter. We know that. He had dark hair. So I think, we know we can take on different roles. Like sometimes you'll see kids that look like their grandparents be just because of the way genetics and DNA work. I also think the third reason was the conception thing. And I think it's hard to base anything off of conception. Women did not find out they were pregnant until they were pretty much in their second trimester. And who knows if Cecily went a little early or she was late, or times were way different when it comes to having children and like conception. And I think it was more, not I think, but based on studies, it's more likely that cycles were not as frequent or routine as they are now. So that could have been part of the issue. So when Edward was young, England was in an economic rut. It's more than likely that Edward was brought up alongside his brother Edmund at Ludlow Castle, which their father owned or had or was given. At about 3, Edward was given the title of the Earl of March, and when Edward was 5, his dad was made Lieutenant of Ireland and went there for 2 years, went over to Ireland 2 years afterwards. The French captured Normandy, and English politics were now dominated by the struggle between York and their supporters and the House of Lancaster and the Lancastrians. So Edward was about 11 years old when Henry VI became extremely mentally ill and was in a catatonic state, which it's when you're awake and you're basically out of it. I have talked about that probably in every recent episode, so if you want to go back and take a look at last week's or the week before, you're more than welcome to. So his father took over the government and was supported by Richard Neville, Earl of Salisbury, who was Edward's maternal uncle, and as well as Edward's cousin and son to Richard or the Earl of Salisbury, younger Richard, who we know as fucking Warwick. So in January of 54, 11-year-old Edward rode beside his father when he entered London to attend the Great Council. But with the new prince having arrived 3 months prior, this gave the Lancastrians a new figurehead and caused more political conflict. At 17, Edward became a political and military leader. So good for you, buddy. After the loss of the Battle of Ludford Bridge in 59, Edward, Earl of Salisbury, and fucking Warwick fled to Calais while his father and Edmund went to Ireland. Edward's name is in a manifesto with his father, Salisbury, and fucking Warwick, stating their issue is only with Henry's evil counselors. So the following year, Edward, Salisbury, and fucking Warwick came back to England and entered London in July. He commanded one of the 3 divisions in Northampton that ended in victory and the capture of Henry VI. His father came back and marched into the Palace of Westminster and declared himself king, which again, we did this 2 weeks ago, and was met with silence. But compromise was made with the Act of Accord, and this meant that Henry stayed on the throne, but Richard and his descendants were to be his successors. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to just deepen in the corners, and I do have a new product to share with you, which I'm super amped about. I'm going to do that in just a minute. Okay, so I just finished my eye, and I'm going to actually go in with a new product by new to me by Queen Cosmetics. I've been dying to try this only because of the name and obviously why, and because their products look so friggin' amazing. So I did do this shadow, which as you can tell when I put it in that light, it is just picking up different reflexive color. So I'm gonna see if this works at all. Yep, it does. See how it reflects differently in the light? It's so pretty. Anyways, so I'm going to put this on my lids. And I'm going to go in with my finger just to press into my lid. I love this color. I'm not flipping anybody off. I didn't even realize I did that. This is only a little bit, so I can't even imagine if you put this on top of a black eyeshadow, how cool that would look. Possibly I will do that down the line. And then I'm just going to go back in with the darker color and clean up this my cut crease area. So the implications of getting rid of the legally accepted heir created a huge opposition to the Yorkist administration. In late 60, I'm actually going to go in a little bit with black. I didn't think I was going to do this. I guess that's what we're doing. So bear with me. So in late 60, Edward was given his first independent counsel. And I'm just going to pull this out, kind of like what the Brat Summer thing look is. Just going to pull this out a little bit at the bottom here. So Edward was given his first independent command and was sent to deal with Lancastrian rebellion in Wales. Fucking Warwick stayed in London, but Daddy York, Richard, and Salisbury and Edmund went north to suppress a different rebellion in Yorkshire. Unfortunately, these three were killed after the defeat at Wakefield on December 30th. This left Edward as the figurehead of the Yorkist party. I'm going to pop off real quick and do my liner. Okay, I'm back and I'm going to put my hair up because we're doing foundation now. So Edward has been described as being handsome and energetic and, like I said earlier, really tall. He was about 6'4", which to my 5 foot even ass is really tall, and he would wear impressive clothing to show he was more physically and mentally fit. Unlike the king, Henry VI, he was also a notorious ladies' man, what we may now call a fuckboy or a player. Now, I know a lot of us watched The White Queen. I know, we all know he didn't look like Max Irons, but he really did such a great job at portraying him that I think we all just adore Edward, right? So Edward's first battle as leader was the Battle of Mortimer's Cross in Herefordshire on February 2nd of 61. It was a victory, and after the battle, a meteorological phenomenon happened in the sky. It's called a parhelion. So it's often referred to as a sundog or a mock sun. And this is when basically a halo forms around the sun, causing the reflections from ice crystals in the atmosphere. So basically, the sun has a halo around it, and the reflection makes it look like there is a sun on either side of the sun. Enter Exhibit A. Personally, I've seen these in real life, but never with the 3 sun effect that they saw supposedly in 61, not 1961. 1461. So Edward took this as a sign that he was the sun in splendor, which is a heraldic charge. This was a short-lived victory because 15 days later, fucking Warwick lost the battle, or the second battle of St. Albans, and the Lancastrians regained custody of Henry. Edward and fucking Warwick met in London, and Edward was quickly appointed as king on March 4th. The two cousins then marched north and fought the Lancastrians again in the Battle of Towton on March 29th. This was, or is, the bloodiest battle to ever take place on English soil. It was a huge casualty battle to the point that there was the lands, like the area it happened in, remained blood stained for years afterwards. The York saw a loss of between 3,000 and 4,000 men, and the Lancastrians between 8,000 and 9,000 men. So this caused a huge bitterness from the Lancastrians that survived. Margaret of Anjou went to Scotland for safety with her son, Edward of Westminster, who was about 7 at the time. Henry VI was on the lam for a year, but was eventually caught and put in the Tower of London as a prisoner. The majority of the nobility either stayed neutral or they were loyal to Henry. This forced Edward to rely on the Nevilles for support, which was his mother's family. The next few years was spent consolidating the new regime, and the victory at the Battle of Hexham looked like it ended the Lancastrian threat. This whole situation brought to light the internal divisions over foreign policy between England, France, and Burgundy. Edward preferred a Burgundian ally, but he let fucking Warwick negotiate with Louis XI of France. This treaty included a suggested marriage betrothal between Edward and either Louis's daughter Anne of France or his sister-in-law Bona of Savoy. Bona. Prior to this, though, whole situation, when Margaret of Anjou was in Scotland and had the support of Mary of Guelders, who was the widowed queen consort of Scotland and now dowager queen mother and regent to James III. Since Edward didn't like the relationship between, or the alliance relationship between Margaret of Anjou and Mary. Did I fucking blend that out? He tried to stop it and proposed a marriage between him and Mary. It was rejected, obviously, as was the betrothal between Mary's daughter Margaret and Edward of Westminster, Margaret of Anjou's son, who was also the previous Prince of Wales. Obviously, Margaret of Anjou was not happy about this. In 1462, Mary paid off the Lancastrian royals to leave and made peace with Edward. It was then that she hinted at a possibility of marriage between Edward and herself. This didn't happen, though. We know that. Come October of 64, though, the news hit that Edward had secretly had a private ceremony with Elizabeth Woodville. Their marriage date has been said to be either May the 1st, May the 4th, or late summer of 64. Elizabeth was a widow of a Lancastrian knight who died at the Second Battle of St. Albans on February 17th of 61, and she was also a mother of 2 sons. So this sent Warwick into a fucking tizzy. Not only was the new queen a commoner and a former Lancastrian at that, but it also proved that fucking Warwick wasn't as in control of the king as he thought he was. So Elizabeth had a lot of charm and was smart, and Edward was used to getting what he wanted. I mean, he was a playboy. He had already had a relationship with Elizabeth Lucy. According to Thomas More, Elizabeth Lucy was, we're going to refer to her as just Elizabeth Lucy. This is going to get really confusing coming up. So this one's Elizabeth Lucy, or we'll just say Lucy, and this is who I'm referring to. So Lucy was questioned after Edward and Elizabeth got married. Mama Cecily, wasn't a big fan of this marriage and had suggested that Edward was pre-contracted to marry Lucy. Lucy denied it. At the time, he had already fathered a child with her named Elizabeth. I know, another one. In 1463. It's pretty much accepted that this marriage was a snap decision. Did he want to get laid, or did he fall madly in love with her? I like to believe the latter, but a fuckboy is a fuckboy. So who knows? We weren't there. One view is that he did this because the low social status of the Woodvilles would leave them reliant on him, therefore would stay loyal to him. Another view is that this was planned out, but there were better options available. But this did have a huge impact on the rest of Edward's reign. It also posed problems for all of the single and ready to mingle nobility. Queen Elizabeth had 12 siblings, which we learned about in Jaquetta's video. So they all needed to be married. So now they're gonna come before the other nobles. So obviously this pissed off a lot of daddies trying to marry off their daughters. A few of the marriages that really caused an issue was little Catherine Woodville married Henry Stafford, 2nd Duke of Buckingham. Anne Woodville married William Bourchier, 1st Earl of Essex, and Eleanor Woodville to Anthony, the heir of Edmund Grey, 1st Earl of Kent. Now, if fucking Warwick wasn't already through the roof with Edward, Edward's brother-in-law, John Woodville, married fucking Warwick's 65-year-old aunt, Catherine Neville, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. John was 19. Catherine was also the older sister to Edward's mother, so that also made it his aunt. Now, I get Edward wanted to build like a really strong family circle around Elizabeth, but he also had siblings to marry off, and fucking Warwick had 2 daughters that needed high status marriages. So Edward, in his infinite wisdom, pissed everybody off. I'm back looking crazy. I just wanted to kind of give this a little bit boost. I have a roller in with a clip pulling it down because that never stays for me. So I'm going to use my Vive Bark and Velvet Sands lip liners because I am going to use a new me product today. Another one by Queen Cosmetics. Now this is 2 products today, so I did want to let you know that I do have an affiliate code with them. So if you go onto queencosmetics.com and place an order at checkout, make sure that you use the code Makeup and Monarchies and you get 10% off. That's what it was, which is exciting. And I'm like, I've been dying to try this line. So I went through with Bark first. Now I'm going to go in with Velvet Sands. I'm just going to like fill in on the edges. And this liner is really nice and creamy, so this is something very easily that you can do with this lip liner. Now I got it's Queen Cosmetics. I'm using the Mega Volume Lip Enhancer Gloss in Watermelon. I did try this before we're doing this, so I did not have a reaction. My lips did get bigger because it's what they're supposed to do, but I didn't have an allergic reaction, which was fantastic. And it is just like, if you watched my last video where I used the flower nose, this doe foot applicator, don't mind that I got my lip liner on it, but this doe foot also has a hole in it, so it will hold more product in on the applicator. So I'm gonna finish. It does tingle. I'm not gonna lie, it does tingle, but it's actually better than the old one from, I think it was Tarte or Too Faced. That burned like hell, but this one, it tingles, but it does work. So it's on. I think it took like 10 minutes or something, but see if you can notice a difference at the end. I did notice a difference when I used it. So anyways, getting back to it. So 1467 rolls around. Queen Elizabeth has already given birth to their first royal baby on February 11th of 66. And what do you think this little girl's name was? Elizabeth. You were right. As if we didn't have enough already. She does give birth to their second child, another girl named Mary, and she was born on August 11th of 67. It was around this time as well that Lucy, the king's mistress, gives birth to their second child, Arthur. The year of his birth has been given as either 67 or 65, so he did go on to live like a pretty good life, and I would love to cover him in one of these episodes because I think it's just interesting, his life. Now it's been I think it's been like probably 4 minutes, not for you, for me, since I applied this, so it is starting to tingle. If I keep doing that, it's because it's really tingling. So while we're on the subject of mistresses, let's talk about Playboy Edward. So Edward loved women, apparently. I mean, it's clear to us, right? So Eleanor Butler was also a mistress. It's possible that she did have a child with Edward. It was possible to be born right before her death in 67. It was this affair relationship that caused a lot of issues later on. And I did quote affair because it's said that this happened, like their relationship took place before he was even married to Elizabeth Woodville. So it was claimed after his death that by a bishop, or by the Bishop of Bath and Wells, Robert Stillington, that Edward married Eleanor, or that he had married Edward and Eleanor. This is very convenient coming from the bishop that worked for his younger crazy brother, George. And if you don't know why he's crazy, we're going to get there. The bishop backed Richard, Edward's youngest brother, in his effort to pass an act in Parliament, Titulus Regius. This bishop had also been imprisoned and fined by Edward in 1478 for speaking out against him. That was also part of George's crazy period. So this whole thing sounds more to me that Stillington had a bone to pick with a dead man, Petty Freddy. So I had spoke about Elizabeth Lucy earlier, and Eleanor and Elizabeth Lucy often get confused. So I hope that this helps differentiate the two women. Personally, I don't think that he was contracted to marry either one of them. I think Edward liked to bang, and these were his two main booty calls. So very simple. I think the pre-contract thing came up later because it fit a narrative. Also, I'm not a fan of him. I know people are. I'm just not, because I don't know. Thomas More was around 5 fucking years old when this Act of Parliament thing was happening. So I take what he says with a grain of salt. I really think that he was just fitting a Tudor narrative. I don't think he really knew what was happening. Or it was a game of telephone where he's told one thing and then blah, blah, blah. So getting back to 1467, I almost said 1967 again. Edward ended up dismissing his Lord Chancellor, George Neville, Archbishop of York, another cousin of Edward and brother to fucking Warwick. So if Warwick wasn't already steaming, he was now. He ganged up with Edward's younger brother George against the king. This obviously left Edward worried, and when a betrothal between George and fucking Warwick's oldest daughter Isabel was proposed, he blocked it. George and fucking Warwick went, I see your hand and raise you this, by traveling to Calais with the fam and marrying George and Isabel in a ceremony that was conducted by George Neville. After this, the three men issued a claim that listed alleged abuses by the Woodvilles and other advisors that were close to Edward. They then went back to London and assembled an army to remove these counselors and establish a good government. Edward was in the north with his army, and he was defeated by the Neville force at Edgecote Moor on July 24th of 69. After this, Edward was held in Middleham Castle by fucking Warwick, who had already captured Richard and John Woodville, father and brother to the Queen, following the battle. Both of these men were executed with no trial on August 12th at Kenilworth Castle. Once the realization hit that fucking Warwick and George had very little support, Edward was released in September, and Edward didn't really help the situation. Nothing really changed and tensions were mounting. In early 1470, Edward reinstates Henry Percy as Earl of Northumberland, which had been taken from him following the Battle of Towton, and it was given to Richard's brother, or fucking Warwick's brother John. Now, the Neville family and Percy family had an ongoing rivalry that dates back to the early 1400s. So this was a huge slight against the Nevilles. 2 months later, fucking Warwick and George took a private, smaller feud against Edward and made it into a full-scale revolt. This was defeated by Edward, and the two men ran off to France in May. There, Louis XII talked fucking Warwick into a negotiation with his longtime rival, Margaret of Anjou. The two agreed, and Margaret made fucking Warwick kneel in front of her in silence for 15 minutes. I love this. Within this negotiation was a marriage between Margaret's son, Edward of Westminster, and fucking Warwick's youngest daughter, Anne. Now, with this support, he landed back in England on September 9th and made his intention to restore Henry to the throne publicly known. At this time, the York regime was unpopular, and the Lancastrians quickly put together an army of over 30,000. John Neville switched sides, and Edward escaped capture. He fled with his men and sought refuge in Flanders, basically in exile. Elizabeth, the three girls, There are 3 daughters. Elizabeth Woodville was heavily pregnant at this time with another baby. So it was her mother Jaquetta, and the 3 kids, the 3 girls, sought refuge and sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. So we're going to leave this story here, and we're going to pick up in part 2, which is going to come out in a few days. I am going to save fun facts for the absolute end of this. And again, I had to do this in 2 episodes because there's so much information. I can't put it into one, clearly, because I still talked for like 10 minutes after I was done doing my makeup. So that's it for this week, for this episode. I'm going to see you again in like another one in a few days. So I hope that you enjoyed. It's been almost 10 minutes since I put this on, so the tingling has subsided. They do look a little bit bigger to me. I don't know if you can tell. I hope you can tell. They do feel bigger too. So I'm gonna say this stuff is fucking great. So there it is. All right. So I hope you guys have a great one. I will see you in the next one. Stay tuned. See you guys. Bye.